And oh, thank you. Feel free to add your questions at any time throughout today's conversation. We're hoping to hold a few minutes at the end to get to audience questions. We'll get to as many as we can. So with that, let me introduce our speakers. Today, we are joined by Sophia Heller, Jimmy Chen, and Jamer Hunt. So let me start with Sophia. Sophia is the Special Advisor for Poverty Alleviation Strategy and Planning at the New York City Administration for Children's Services. She has worked in systems change inside and outside of government with a focus on structuring and scaling systems to improve the economic stability, mobility, and living standards of low-income households and communities. Sophia has served as a senior advisor of homelessness and social policy at the New York City Mayor's Office, policy director for housing and economic development for the city of Los Angeles, and managing director at Single Stop USA, which is where I first met Sophia many years ago. And Single Stop is a national nonprofit that connects low-income families to vital government benefits and resources. So, Sophia, we're so glad you're here. Thanks for being here today. Um, Next up, let me introduce Jamer Hunt. Jamer's work explores the poetics and politics of design for complex systems. He's the author of Not to Scale, How the Small Becomes Large, the Large Becomes Unthinkable, and the Unthinkable Becomes Possible. This is a book that repositions scale as a practice-based framework for navigating social change in complex systems. Jamer was founding director of the graduate program in transdisciplinary design at Parsons School of Design, and he has served as vice provost for transdisciplinary initiatives and program director for university curriculum at the New School. With Paola Antonelli at MoMA, he's created the award-winning curatorial experiment in book Design and Violence, and Fast Company has named Jamer to their list of most creative people. Wow. Jamer, thank you so much for being here today. And then third, we have Jimmy Chen, who we're so thrilled is here today. Jimmy is the founder and CEO of Propel, an app that is used by over 5 million low-income households to manage their government benefits. With over 1 million five-star reviews, people across the country use Propel every single day to navigate grocery shopping with EBT, optimize their Medicare and Medicaid, find jobs, and save money. In addition to his work at Propel, Jimmy serves on the boards of Share Our Strength, the anti-hunger nonprofit, and Tech NYC, a nonprofit coalition representing New York's technology industry. Jimmy has a BS in Symbolic Systems from Stanford University, where he was an inaugural recipient of the President's Award for the Advancement of the Common Good. So thank you for joining us today, Jimmy. We're glad to have all three of you. And like I said, we are also joined by my lovely colleague, Judy Park Lee. So I would be remiss if I did not introduce Judy as well. She's going to be facilitating our conversation today. Judy is a researcher and service designer with a focus on building more equitable public services, spaces, and institutions. Her experience is grounded in conducting rigorous, creative research across multiple domains, including policy research to inform affordable housing policymaking internationally, design research to improve patient and staff experiences at hospitals, UX research to iterate on innovative financial products, and transdisciplinary research to investigate bureaucratic environments through immersive installations. Judy holds an MFA in transdisciplinary design from the Parsons School of Design and a BA in sociology from Harvard University. All right, with that, let us get started with today's conversation. Judy, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shanti. So as Shanti mentioned, hi, everybody. My name is Judy Park Lee. I am the research director at PPL. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all and our three panelists. Before we dive in, I just wanted to give some quick context on the topic of our conversation today, which is all about scaling. So I recently published a short essay a couple weeks ago about my first ever service design project that I did at PPL back in 2019. And in that project, our team was helping the New York City Department of Education equip their community schools to become essentially these neighborhood hubs where families could get connected to benefits like SNAP and affordable housing and childcare. And Sophia was also involved in that project way back then. And our job was really to design a program model and a set of tools that could be used by all 250 schools in the system across the city. And now that figure is actually up to 400 schools. So this model and these tools really needed to be able to flexibly adapt to the school's specific neighborhood context, to their level of resources, to their staffing structures and workflows. And the post is really about like what I learned in the course of that project about designing services at scale. And so in it, I talk about strategies like really making sure to invest in on-the-ground research and relationship building, leveraging the existing infrastructure and workflows, designing standard recipes that people can really make their own and adapt to their own needs. And then also designing not just for one isolated challenge, but for multiple challenges across the different layers of the service system. And in addition to these strategies, I also surface these broader questions of, what does it really mean to have an impact at scale? What is really the goal behind scaling? And, is scaling itself really the right goal always? So these are really the open questions that I'd love to bring into this discussion with you all. I really wrote this from my vantage point as a civic service designer, but our panelists come from different backgrounds in city government and technology and transdisciplinary design. And I'm really eager to hear what you all have to say on this topic. So with that, I'm going to kick off our discussion by asking each of you in turn to answer this question, which is, what are the scales that you are currently working at or have worked at? And what does having an impact at scale mean to you? So maybe I'll start with Jamer, and then we could go to Sophia and then Jimmy.
Sure. Thank you, Judy. And thanks so much for this invitation. And it's an extraordinary group of people to be amongst. So that's a thrill. And to have it moderated by someone, if you haven't connected the dots yet, that I once taught is a special thrill that only a teacher can really appreciate. So Judy, great to see you. And, I think the scales that I operate at vacillate, as they think they probably do for all of us. And, it also depends on whether you're talking about in one's professional life and one's personal life. I mean, there's the scale of the family, there's the scale of the community. So, cleaning up a park is, in a sense, kind of working at the community scale, which I was doing a couple weeks ago. And, but I think in my professional work, it also kind of vacillates between, the very one-to-one scale of working with students, where, it's really about kind of listening and understanding, and trying to provide an environment in which they can learn best. Most of my classes, I don't tend to teach at the scale of, 200 students, that kind of thing. So that I'm in a classroom where what I'm trying to do is not create a singular kind of envelope in which everyone's learning the same thing, but really try and approach teaching with the idea of creating an environment in which everyone can maximize their learning. And that sometimes means kind of customizing and not just treating every student as identical units to be sort of educated, but really seeing them as full humans who have different sorts of needs. But then I also, within the university, work at the scale of the university. So in various roles, including sort of vice provost role and program director for university curriculum, it's, really trying to understand the university as an ecosystem, and understanding where are the opportunities to create new kinds of pathways for students and faculty to kind of learn, to teach, to collaborate, and to do things in new sorts of ways that sometimes work against the inertia of a larger organization. In the case of the new school, 10,000 students. And so trying to find the levers and the pathways for making new sorts of experiences. The nice thing about the new school is it is a school and very invested in experimentalism. And so, there was an appetite amongst almost everyone in the community for more opportunity to kind of reorient the institution. And yet the institution kind of holds its shape in really sort of inflexible ways. So making those kinds of changes, it can be difficult. And, and then I think there's lots of different ways in which I try and work across, sort of more national, international scales through collaborations with other universities, with other practitioners, et cetera. So it really does run the gamut. And I think that's part of what makes kind of working in today's environment so exciting. I just got off a conversation this morning with the president of a art school in Sweden. And, that's a regular conversation we have that's absolutely delightful and is enabled by technology and allows us to consider new kinds of collaboration in new ways. And so, I think I'm always modulating between not only scales, but not only sort of spatial scales, but in some cases temporal scales, but really across spaces.
Thanks, Jamer. I love that kind of meditation on the one-to-one scale of teaching, and then all the way across the university, and then internationally and nationally. Sophia, do you want to jump in?
Hello, from the public sector with the beautiful design
I love
decorations that we have. So I'm Sophia, and as Shanti explained a little bit ago, most of my work is in government. And I think when I think about scale or the work that I do, it's really about the institutionalization of an operations that, in at least for the work that I focus on, is making government not just on its own, but making the government resources work effectively, so that whatever we're doing, wherever you could be, I'm now at Administration for Children's Services in New York, but I've been in homelessness departments and I've been in mayor's offices, worked at the FDIC, like whatever institutions government has, how can you institutionalize systems at scale that allow those institutions to really serve low-income communities and low-income households. So I really appreciate the way that Jamer was putting it. Like, you have to work at the individual level often, and then kind of a more international scale. I think taking it that same kind of flow, even if you're doing institutional change in large government agencies, whether it's municipal or state or federal, taking into account what people need at the ground as an individual level, like what do they need? What do they want? I think it's a lot about what you were saying, Judy, like nothing's going to be institutionalized, nothing's going to last, nothing's going to be sustainable unless you work with the individual people that are involved. And those are people in and out of government, especially now, because government doesn't do a lot on its own. It generally contracts through other organizations. Jimmy's sitting at the Robin Hood Foundation. Foundations are critical to this whole process. They allow us to test things with all of our stakeholders. So I think I have to say, for scaling, it's critical that you start with the individuals that are going to be stakeholders, and that you build systems with them that work for them, that are financially sustainable, administratively sustainable, so that it can be scaled across.
Thanks for sharing that, Sophia. Jimmy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Judy, and thanks for having me here. It's great to reconnect with you all, and for Judy to bring us all together. I'm starting to realize this is kind of Judy pulling in people that she's worked with in the past. We were fortunate to have Judy as a UX researcher at Propel back in 2021. So I guess my hope is that I can provide a perspective of someone who started from no scale. So I started Propel from just not a company. And over the last 12 years, now we serve more than 5 million households across the country each month who receive SNAP benefits and use our mobile app. We are proud to have more than 1 million 5-star reviews from people, and view the Propel app as likely one of the most highly trafficked pieces of software on the internet, used specifically by low-income people to navigate safety net services. And I'm very happy to talk about the details of how we kind of got to that scale over the last 12 years of kind of different decisions we made, and challenges and hurdles and all those things. I would also add that we've tried to be very responsible about how we utilize that scale. We utilize our scale both in routine ways to help improve the day-to-day experience of using America's safety net, using the SNAP program, and we use it in ways during crises as well. So, for example, during the government shutdown last November that had a delay on SNAP benefits, we were able to raise $12 million and distribute it to SNAP recipients in real time as a cash aid payment. During the Medicaid unwinding a few years ago, we were able to help about 3 million households take a quiz to understand what the impact of Medicaid unwinding is going to be for them. And so I think that there's some opportunity for us to use the scale of being able to reach 5+ million households who get SNAP benefits in a technology tool that allows us to distribute content.
Yeah, I remember the effort that you all did raising the money for the SNAP beneficiaries. That was really cool, cool effort. Yeah, I think it's clear that for all of you, like you all are working at scales from the level of the individual all the way up to national and beyond. And I'd love to kind of dig in a little bit more into the various strategies that you've used in your work and the tensions that you've encountered in your respective efforts to scale. And so perhaps I can start with Sophia this time. You've scaled programs at multiple city agencies in New York City and LA, and you're currently leading this effort at ACS to scale this new model for connecting families to resources that support their economic stability. My question for you is, what factors determine whether a program gets successfully scaled at the city level? And, before you had said, you start with the individual and you scale from there. And the question I have there is like, with so many different service providers that are responsible for implementing a service, how do you ensure that you have a consistent experience for families that is still tailored for their individual needs? How do you balance that? So 2 questions for you.
So the first, I think it was, how do you scale things at a city level? Is that what you were saying? So so first of all, if anybody's listening, money is important. So we're in the middle of budget right now, and at the end of the day, it's, does everybody agree that it's important enough to fund? And so we're in the middle of that, and nothing happens without that. But I think that same question is like, is it important to enough people, enough agencies? So like when we're scaling here, we're not just scaling in one agency, we're scaling across agencies. And obviously we also need the buy-in of City Hall or the Office of Management and Budget, as well as the providers that you mentioned that do the actual work. So I think to get to scale, you got to start at the beginning with making sure that it's of interest to everybody. It meets people's goals, that you find the common ground that is not just, that people really believe in. So the ACS's, the Administration of Children's Services goals do cross over, and some are aligned with other departments like the Department of Social Services, the Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection, and the mayor's office and other agencies. So aligning those goals, making sure that what's important to us is also important to them is the first step. And then the same for the nonprofits that we do our work through, the providers. And with them, it's also, is this important to them? Do they have the capacity to do it? What do they need in order to have that capacity? And then also at the level of the families and youth that we serve, is this important? Is this of value to them? So once you figure out that it's of value to everybody, and then work together to come up with a way of designing it. PPL has been really helpful in doing that, coming up with designs that also work operationally, so that you start with something that operationally can be implemented at different levels of government, as well as the local level, I think is critical. And I think that's what the work that we're doing right now with you guys at PPL is designing something that achieves the goals, but that the operations at the grassroots level or at the implementation level are flexible enough to meet the specific needs of the community organizations that are implementing them, and then thus to meet the needs of the families, because they're not a homogeneous group. There you go.
Thank you for that. I'm curious, with the project that you're working on with ACS right now, what are some of the considerations that you are thinking through as you're thinking about scaling this effort? I know I know that the team is kind of in the stage of designing the program itself, but as you move into a place of piloting and scaling, are there any challenges that are on your mind or things that you're looking out for potentially?
I think it's really important to know that you don't know how it's going to end up, that the model is going to end up. We're really committed to the goals. We want people to have access to economic and concrete resources throughout the city. So we know that's the goal, but there's I mean, and I've had this experience in other places in Los Angeles. Like I thought that the scaling would happen through one agency, and I ended up being completely wrong after testing it and designing it, testing it with people and with different nonprofits across the city. And in hindsight, I'm really glad that we hadn't made those very important operational decisions before actually testing it. And that's what we're doing now. I mean, we, in the nitty-gritty of it, we don't know if every provider, what degree of services every provider is going to do on its own versus collaborating with other providers to make so that families are referred between providers. Probably doesn't make much sense out of context, but I honestly don't know how it's going to end up being designed in the end. So going slowly in the testing and the redesign is invaluable.
Yeah. I love that idea of really thinking about or taking an iterative approach to it and scaling as slowly, kind of as you go, as you test and validate, and then, at every level.
Yeah, I think putting the time in, the effort, and listening to people in a very honest way is the only way I think that you get to anything at scale that's successful.
Totally. And that's definitely kind of what I found in my experience of it's really that on the ground research and relationship building can feel like it's really labor intensive. And do we really need to put in all of this effort? You kind of want to get right away to the design part. But for us, every time, I think it's like very much worth the effort to build those connections and relationships and get that buy-in. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sophia. I'm going to pivot over to Jimmy, and I'd love to kind of know, since 2014, Propel, you've raised over $68 million from investors to grow this business, and it now serves over 5 million users across the country. And as a mission-driven company, it seems like you're scaling these two things simultaneously. You're growing the business and you're also expanding the impact. And I'm curious to know, have those things always kind of aligned or gone hand in hand in your experience? And, how have you navigated the relationship between the two over the years in the history of the company?
Yeah, I will name that we chose a very particular vehicle to run this company through, that is being a venture capital backed for-profit company. And that has the ability to generate a lot of scale, but is absolutely not the right vehicle to solve every type of problem. In fact, it's probably not the right vehicle to solve most problems, especially the ones, problems we talk about that are in the public interest. And a lot of our work over the last decade plus has been navigating that alignment and doing work every single day to try to keep things as directly aligned as possible. And I'll give a few examples of that. But yeah, I mean, for us, like it starts from kind of the structure of the company and the capital structure of the company. So we've been able to raise capital from a blend of investors ranging from traditional for-profit investors to social impact investors to nonprofits and foundations. As Sophia mentioned earlier, I'm sitting inside the Robin Hood Foundation office, which is where we got our start back in 2014. And we've continued to get grant funding from a variety of organizations, most recently from the Gates Foundation. I think that blend of capital actually is really helpful for us on a structural level to think about what our incentives are. We actually very much aspire to be judged by those types of organizations around their metrics at the same time. So we want to have the level of impact that a nonprofit or a foundation is able to judge its grant by. We want to have a level of business growth and scale that a for-profit investor can see kind of a business return from. And we're trying to do those through the same universe of work. That really is like, I don't love the phrase like secret sauce, but that's kind of our secret sauce. Right? We're trying to make that happen. Um, so just maybe like 20 seconds on Propel and actually how we do that. So we build a free mobile app used by over 5 million households to manage their SNAP benefits. We replace, historically, people call this 1-800 number on the back of their EBT card to check the balance. So we're building an app that gives people a more modern experience of that. And along with that, seeing people's balance, we're also helping people save money. A lot of it's on food. A lot of it's like savings on local grocery or discounts on online shopping. We're also helping people save money on various bills, helping our users find jobs and so on. So the app is free for users, and we're monetizing by helping our users improve their financial health by connecting to these different ways to save and make money. I think, you asked the question about, is it like, are the business and the mission always aligned? And I would say, like, the honest answer is they're not intrinsically aligned, but that for us to succeed as an organization, we must make them as aligned as possible. And one of the ways that I like to do that is by increasing the time scale that we're having the conversation on. Right? If you're trying to maximize profits in the next day, week, month, quarter, that's where I think a lot of the pressure can come in and make it really difficult to make a decision that is fully aligned. But when you're making a decision on a much longer time scale, so when we're talking about our aspiration for Propel to be among the most trusted consumer brands for low-income Americans, across the entire country, that's not a thing you're going to have, you will achieve by working hard for a week or for a month or for a quarter. That's like a decade plus, multiple decades kind of journey to build that kind of brand equity and that kind of reputation in the space. And if you extend the timeline that way, then actually I think the incentives actually do align quite well. Right? That we really want to earn the trust of low-income Americans by doing the right thing by them time and again. And that actually is the business maximizing move for us. So that's the only way that we can build the kind of brand and the kind of scale and the kind of reach that will allow our business to hit the metrics that our for-profit investors want us to hit. And so, that time scale question is usually where I try to like pivot the conversation to. There's another kind of like practical component of us trying to make that real, which is that we've taken the unusual move of taking a portion of the stock of the company and putting it in a trust that is intended to benefit the users of the Propel app. So someday, if we are able to make the stock of Propel incredibly valuable, that some portion of that will automatically be distributed as cash to people who use the Propel app, as a way to kind of try to align these, like, I talked about this very long-term, several decades long kind of alignment thing. We also wanted to make sure there's a financial component of that that is core to how we operate the company and how we think about making sure the incentives stay aligned.
Yeah, I love that you're actually setting up a direct mechanism to make sure that those two things do go hand in hand, that they're linked. And the thing that you say about like kind of the scale of time, I think that reminds me of Jamer's allusion to the temporal scale and what can you do over that, kind of with that in mind. And maybe so I might go to Jamer and ask, in your book, Jamer, Not to Scale, you've written about how technology has changed our relationship to scale, and how, framing a problem across different scales can unlock these new perspectives and approaches. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you the AI question here. And the title of our event is No Shortcuts to Scale, but I think there are many who believe that AI can offer these shortcuts to rapid expansion in different fields. And I'd just love to get your thoughts on that and how you think that AI has shifted our relationship to scale and our approach to problem solving in these complex systems. Thanks
so much, Judy. Love to get the "Can AI save the world?" question. Thanks for putting that on my shoulders. I have a pretty ill-formed kind of response to what you've posed, in the sense that there are obviously qualities and characteristics to artificial intelligence that will enable remarkably kind of positive and beneficial outcomes for people. And simply the idea that we all can sort of move through life with a kind of wildly informed and knowledgeable intelligence that can help us through situations that may be new to us or different from what we've experienced before, promises all kinds of benefits in terms of people's ability to kind of navigate the complexities of the world. Do I, and thinking about agentic AI and the ways in which we may be able to save some of the labor of whether it's bureaucratic kind of waiting or whether it's simply sort of new ways to do things in the world, find economies of scale, et cetera. All that seems extraordinarily promising and to have remarkable potential. Do I feel that the sort of more or less five organizations that kind of hold the five black boxes that organize the landscape of artificial intelligence at the moment will have the interests of the general population in mind when thinking about these technologies? Not so confident so far. There are interesting, at least with the sort of spread of digital technology, there was the open source movement that allowed for the possibility that there may be a way to scale differently rather than through a centralized kind of command and control sort of economic model and move towards more a distributed one, more bottom up. And there have been some pushes for more open source LLMs and things that may end up becoming as impactful as Linux did, for example, where it suddenly sort of stole the server sort of business model away from the sort of more for-profit commercial entities and really dominated the marketplace as a result of being better made. And so there is some hope for that, but it's hard to see that right now with the kind of privatization and the clutching of those models. There are real sort of possibilities in this, and so I don't want it's certainly way too early to tell. And I think that there's the question will be, and you can hear it in the answers from Sophia and from Jimmy, that when working within these systems, the question is, what values are you prioritizing? And if those values are financial in nature, then they will have the kinds of impact that we've seen from heavily capitalized and centralized kind of organizations to concentrate wealth within a very few people's hands. If those values are different from that, if they are about sharing knowledge, if they are about sharing capacity, if it's spreading liberty, if it's spreading hope or freedom or some kind of other value that many of us hold dear, then the kind of polarity and the dynamics of those systems might shift towards something radically different. The problem right now is that the sort of financialization of these technologies seems to be the only vector that is important for the companies that are racing to the top as they see it. And so in that sense, I'm not so hopeful. If they ascribe to certain kinds of values that go beyond that, and maybe we'll see those happen in medicine and in law and other areas. But I think you need to build companies, as Jimmy has, where the values are differently oriented, and where where the financial component is, yes, one part of the picture, but it's not the only part of the picture, and it's not where the values of the organization lie. And until we see that, I'm not so hopeful that we will see a transformation unless we get a splintering off of either a kind of open source model or small language models or some sort of breakthrough technology that allows us to kind of think at the scale of the smaller and of the individual and the family and the community and the neighborhood and things like that. Right now, it's a little too black boxy for all that, for my sense of what is possible. But maybe things can change, and I'm not. It's so early in this story. I think in the early days of building the internet, if you had kind of prophesied Linux becoming what it was, you would have been considered a romantic fool. And so I think that similarly, there will hopefully be some ways in which we kind of connect up these intelligences that provide us with a different kind of frame for thinking about the change that we want. In the end, however, I am not a technological determinist. I think people helping people will always be our way forward. And, it's talking to people, it's getting to know them, it's being human, it's being social. Those are the things that will change society for the better. The technology is simply a kind of accelerant or a lubricant. And when we make it the central story, we lose, I think, the thread of the narrative about what really makes us human, which is our ability to connect with one another and to help each other when we're in need and to support each other in the things that we do. So I think we have to keep that always kind of first and foremost of mind.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jamer. Sophia and Jimmy, I'm curious to hear your perspectives on this, and how you've seen, this conversation around AI, the pressures of adopting it play out in your work.
I'm kind of chewing on Jamer's last point there about people versus technology as the focal point. And especially in public services and in the American safety net and programs that we are close to, I think that can get lost sometimes, but it's such an incredible point. I would say that the addition that I would have to it, though, is I do think sometimes in the dialogue around government services, the technology piece gets lost a little bit and it gets deprioritized to a level where the end product that gets shipped, like the experience of whether it's applying for or recertifying SNAP or doing any number of other things, ends up being something that for a consumer feels like you jumped in a time machine and hopped back to 1995 and used the internet. And I say that in full understanding that our public servants administering these programs deal with 1,000,001 different challenges that are not seen by the consumer, from funding to rules to legal to administrative, all those things. Absolutely the case. But at the end of the day, a family applying for SNAP benefits doesn't know or care about most of those things. And they just get a website that doesn't work on mobile or that has bugs or any number of other things. And so, I think AI is obviously not the cure-all for that. But I do think AI is reflective of the shifting frontier of consumer expectations, that people have now over the last couple of years gotten familiarized at least a little bit with asking a chatbot things and expecting a reasonable answer in return. We have learned from Propel users that there are a number of people who use the Propel app that are also going to ChatGPT to answer questions about the safety net, much like they've gone to Google to answer those questions in the past. And so I think it's not a question of should it happen or not? It's that it is happening. AI is being used for public services, for safety net services, for people in critical situations. It's a question of how well are the current tools doing, and can we, is there the ability to either influence those or try to replace those with better ones built for these specific use cases? So at Propel, a lot of our work, which we've published on the Propel blog, has been sort of talking about going deep into SNAP and trying to get into the specific use cases of, for example, somebody who receives SNAP might receive a notice in the mail that tells them they need to fill out certain forms or take certain actions to continue receiving benefits. Can AI help to summarize that letter and provide a more concise, here's what you should do, or you don't have to do it? It's all benefits are going to continue arriving kind of feature. That's something that we've started piloting in a few locations. But for us, it's been more about can we take bit by bit the interactions around the safety net and find ways in which, is it possible for AI to safely intermediate some of those, as opposed to let's do the wholesale, everything's AI now kind of thing, which I don't see as the right view.
Yeah. Sophia, any thoughts on this? Yeah.
I love that we're having this conversation because I, sitting here in government, I feel like it's my responsibility to figure out how to integrate AI, cutting edge technology into the work that we do. I feel like just because people are low income and depending on government doesn't mean that they don't deserve the best processes, most efficient ways of getting what they need when they need it. It's really hard to do. And here we're having a conversation about scale. So government's always trying to scale. So you scale something for $25 million one year, and then you got to keep scaling it the next year. You can't go back and say, I need another $25 million because we're going to change it because AI changed everything. It's real. So I'm going to recruit everybody here into my little group, but I've been making calls and talking to people for a whole more than a year now, because I know that we scale kind of iteratively, but in the next year, 2, 3 years, like figuring out whether it's actually the government systems or bringing on other systems through our partners, how we do this to make sure that, like I said, that the people that we're serving have access to what everybody else gets, in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
So so I really feel like my job is always much more of a facilitator than the creator. So I have to depend on and reach out to people all the time to figure out, like, how can we get this stuff to work for the public benefit, which is what Jamer was saying.
Yeah.
And I think, if I might just jump in, I also think there's a great potential in customizability with AI that is really different from a lot of technologies before that have scaled more linearly. And so the idea, for instance, even if you just think about something as simple as language and the idea that your services could be delivered in every language, sort of equally well, and well is in quotes, and those translation services may not be, the best, but just to think at that level is extraordinary. That you no longer have to pick your top 7 languages, 8 languages, whatever it is, and print that on a thing that goes out, but it ignores the other hundreds of languages that people are speaking. Just simple things like that are extraordinary, and that's where I think there is real opportunity to do good and to think about it. To Jimmy's point, just the way in which we can incrementally improve things that may seem, sometimes incrementalism gets a bad name, but a small difference in a service can make a big difference for somebody who might understand it finally in a way that they didn't before, and that can be life-changing. So, I think that but it's also important to not just focus on the huge wins and the glamorous wins and the big wins, but also, as I think Sophia and Jimmy both pointed out, sometimes it's the really small wins that can make real differences, and those might not kind of have a press release with them and whatever, but sometimes those can really make a difference. And that's where I would love to see these technologies really be activated.
Yeah, I love that thought. Yeah, I think just if it offers this, I love the idea that it offers this potential benefit of customization, of better comprehension, these small kind of things around the edges that really improve the experience for low-income families. But also to Jimmy's point, like thinking about how to do that in a responsible way and in a way that makes sense with the products that you're rolling out. I want to take a quick pivot just to, we've talked about these different strategies or approaches to scaling and about this topic of AI, but I want to take a minute to just like reflect on the goal of scaling itself. And, these days it seems like people regard scaling as this kind of foregone conclusion, as something that obviously should be done. You should scale as fast as you're able to in as many places as you can. And if it works in one context, then of course we should have it work everywhere. And I just want to kind of interrogate that for a little bit. And to ask you all, do you think that that is the right way to think about it? Were there any moments in your work where scaling wasn't the right answer? And what might we potentially lose when we try in our quest for scale? In trying to scale everything. So anyone who wants to respond, feel free to jump in.
In the interest of time, I'll just jump in with the obvious thing. When Mark Zuckerberg, et cetera, started Facebook to rate the looks of other college students, I doubt they imagined that what they were building would ultimately be sort of deployed by foreign interests to try and tilt US elections and become a kind of megaphone for hate as well. And so, I think this is the paradox of scale, right? That, the kind of benefits that might be shareable, viruses work at a lovely way at scale. They want to grow and adapt and infect as many people as they can, as we experienced in COVID and have through various things. And so, I think there are absolute risks in the idea of scalability. And I think one of the things that certainly I've learned over and over again, and part of the reason I was, wrote this book on scale was because there are these kind of moments of phase change where things, start off as a Facebook, in a college and suddenly become this sort of interstitial network that links billions of people together and then suddenly so that they can share photos of their children and then suddenly becomes a site for the weaponization of information and the spread of hate. And so we have to, and you can't get from A to B to F to Z when you're at A and B and understand that. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to kind of recognize is that these scaling technologies, if unregulated, risk amplifying the negative things that we don't sort of anticipate, and can be as corrosive and toxic and as destabilizing. I mean, look at children's mental health and social media, and just on and on and on and on. Things you never would have guessed would be the outcomes of these. But because in some ways these instruments were tuned towards values of profit maximization, then we get these unanticipated effects. And I think it's in that kind of social contract around what technology can do that we have to be perhaps, I believe, a little bit more interventionist and regulatory in that framework in order to try and kind of unwind some of the social harms that we see from them. So there's absolutely, scaling is never an absolute good. Certainly scaling certain kinds of values is, but I think what we see over and over again is as you scale, unanticipated kind of unknown unknowns emerge. And those are the things you have to kind of try and anticipate or understand when you build something that can scale, that you have to be vigilant in anticipating and responding to those moments. And if not, you get kind of this moment we're in today, which is a very, very frightening one for a lot of people.
Mm.
My maybe like kind of super pragmatic view of it is that it is largely dependent on the problem you're scaling to solve. Like scale for its own sake is almost like meaningless, but it's a matter of what's the problem you're trying to solve. And then to Jamer's point, what are the downstream consequences, whether intended or unintended, of the whatever solution you put in place. And I think, maybe that's where social media can be assessed, right? It's like, well, what problem was it solving, and what's the value of solving that problem, and then what's the harm of the unintended or intended side effects of that? And maybe we do the math there and decide, hey, that's actually it's not worth it, or it's not coming out positive for us. In my domain, focused on Snap and the things that we're doing around the safety net, I'd say, my view on it broadly is, we deeply believe in safety net services and in Snap and in their need in this particular moment in time in the country, and also recognize that a lot of things about Snap, the safety net, are not perfect. And so I think the right bar to hold new solutions to when we think about, are they going to be net better, is like, do we think about them as net better or net worse than the current system? And that has to be inclusive of all of their downstream consequences, intended or not. But if you're able to kind of put those things all together, that's where I think it's like sometimes we hold new solutions to an impossibly high standard of, is it absolutely perfect and does it have no problems? And at that point, it's almost impossible to clear to like be able to do anything new. And so my suggestion is like, rather than hold that standard, it's like let's try to be pragmatic about, is the thing that we're shipping actually better or not than the existing system, which has its own challenges. And I think I don't want to be glib about that. Like I very much like the kind of consequences, side effects, unintended stuff is really, really important. And sometimes that can overwhelm the positive benefit of whatever it is that you're doing. So I think those need to be real conversations in technology. But I also, I think our nudge is always that like, hey, we think there are ways to improve whatever exists today, whether in the SNAP program or elsewhere. And we'd love for people to feel like they can take some level of chance on like, okay, we're going to try something new and see if it can really improve systems.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think once you scale, the work's not done. The feedback loop. I mean, I loved what Jimmy was saying, how, the people who are benefiting are going to maybe have ownership. And the only way that's going to happen is if they're happy. with what's going on. In government, we use data to, and you have to. I think that go back to your stakeholders and is ask if it's working, like creating a constant feedback loop throughout, from the people who use it on the ground through all of government, and having enough respect for the information that you're getting to be able to then say, okay, let's change things on a regular basis and allow. And government's not great at this, but absolutely government can be flexible and change as things go, as things evolve, as needs evolve, as technology evolves. I think you just have to have a commitment to it.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for thoughtfully engaging with that question. I'm just noticing that we have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to see if we can get a couple questions for the audience from the audience. Shanti, can you? Yep, you're coming back. All right.
Hi, everyone. I've been loving this conversation. Thank you so much for having it in front of us. So we do have some questions from the audience. I think to pull on the thread that we are currently exploring, there's a question in the Q&A box that has to do with the relationship between scale and capital. I think, Jimmy, as you were speaking about the business model of your organization, I think that's how this question came up. But broadly tying a couple of these questions together, this idea of scale and funding, the tensions there or the alignment there. How do you maintain the mission drivenness? How do you maintain your values? Jimmy, maybe I can start with you, just saying how do you talk to funders and backers about this question of scale, about the question of your mission and the organization's values and how that plays with perhaps the values and the goals of funders?
Yeah, I think for the majority of funders that we talk to, they want to believe, they want to believe that it's possible for a for-profit company that has a deep social mission to not compromise either one. But they're like, well, how do you actually, it seems hard, right? And a lot of what I'm trying to convince them of for them to invest in Propel is, hey, yes, it is hard. We absolutely acknowledge that and have wrestled with the all the different kind of sides of that. And we have a view of what the right path forward is. And here practically is how it's going to work. Here are the decisions we're making. Here are the structures we're building. Here's how we're going to monetize. Here's how we're offsetting that. Here's capital structure of the company and all those types of things. And so I think, I think that is a big part of it. Propel's investors, whether they are for-profit investors, also care about the social mission. They have a fiduciary duty to return capital, and so they they want us to make them that capital back, but they also are invested in this company rather than some other company because they're like, oh, if I could do that while achieving social outcomes, that's awesome. And I think similarly, our impact investors and foundation funders all are attracted to the fact that we're a for-profit company that can be financially sustainable. And so that idea of yes, we want you to have the impact. We would love for this gift to help you become even more sustainable as an organization is a big part of it. And so I think you asked about scale. We've had this great conversation back and forth on the pros and cons of different types of scale. Again, for us, it goes back to the scale of the problem at Propel that we think about: scale of poverty, the safety net, SNAP program, food insecurity in the United States, and the fact that it is the daily life of tens of millions of Americans right now. Feels like a really meaningful problem that we ourselves are definitely not going to solve alone, but that we and hopefully a large coalition of partners and advocates can try to make a dent on. So I think for us, it really goes back to the scale of the problem. It goes back to if we and our partners and others in the industry didn't do their work, what would happen? Probably bad things. And so I think there's some imperative to figure out how to provide some kind of solution at scale.
I think on that note, Sophia, you mentioned earlier philanthropy and the relationship between philanthropy, private funding with government, public systems. I wonder in our sort of last minute here, if you have anything to add on this idea of how do you talk about scale or not scaling with funders where you're sitting in government?
I agree with Jimmy. They want things to go to scale. And my experience working with philanthropy in a number of different places in this country is that philanthropy allows you to take the risks to develop the thing that you want to scale. And that's like an invaluable role that they play. And being patient, because when you're developing a new thing, like I said earlier, you're never quite sure where you're going to get to. I mean, you know where you're going, but it could take longer, it could be shorter. You're going to pivot during. So having philanthropy be kind of that patient investor is really is critical. At least it has been my experience. And then then they can kind of, depending on where you are, they can also help in bringing other stakeholders together and being an advocate for the scaling that you want to do with government.
Great. Thank you for that. We are at time. This was such a rich and fruitful conversation. I appreciate it so much. I love that as we talked about scale, we talked about, pace and partnerships and people and this idea. I love this idea, Jamer, that like people helping people will always be our way forward. But also that we were reminded that like, yes, technology is an accelerant to make those connections happen. And like that technology can be excellent. And people deserve it to be excellent. So I appreciated that this conversation was wide, varied, and really nuanced. So thank you for joining us today. And thank you to all of our guests for joining us from all over the world. Like I mentioned, this event is part of our PPL15 series. You can read all the blog posts on our website. I shared in the chat a link to Judy's blog post that this conversation was based on. And you can find all our blog posts and see recordings of past events on our website, publicpolicylab.org. Like I said, this is a series. We're doing this once a month-ish. And next month, we will be highlighting some work that we've done with the Department of Veterans Affairs over the years and thinking about measurement of things that perhaps cannot be measured. So I hope that everyone will join us for that. Make sure you're signed up for our newsletter and following us on LinkedIn. We will give you the news and all the places of how you can tune in. So with that, I will say thank you to Sophia, Jamer, and Jimmy for joining us as panelists today, and for Judy, your excellent facilitation. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good rest of your Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.